I'm Mary Polchaninoff, and welcome to Sure Things. So I always like to tell you a little bit about how I met my guest. I met my current guest today. I met her in December, believe it or not, in a gingerbread wine tasting type event that I attended with a friend of mine at Madison Beach Club. And we had some chats, and she's so knowledgeable that I'm so excited she's on our show today. I'd like to welcome Tanya Porcelli. Hi, Tanya. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Mary.
And you are a sommelier.
I am a sommelier. Yes,
yeah, I got that pretty well.
You did. You got it right.
Wow, I was sweating over that one. Good. Well, again, thank you. I was fascinated at the event that I went to, but then even more so just watching you explain the wines and all about the wines. So I really thought it would be great to have you on, especially since we're now into a new season.
Absolutely.
To talk about your background and some of the information about wines and what we might expect or look forward to with our spring and summer wines.
Absolutely. So I guess a little bit about myself, how I got started. When I was a teenager, I thought I was going to be a dentist. So I took all of the science classes. I took chemistry, biology, physics, and I was just amazed by molecular biology. And it was really fascinating to me. And fast forward a few years, I go to college, end up dropping out of my scientific pursuit and became a theater major because it ended up working with my personality a lot more, and I was a set designer anyhow. So I go for my first job at the beautiful theater, and I say, hello, my name is Tanya, and I would like to be your set designer. And they say, well, great, we'll pay you $25 for 6 weeks worth of work. And I say, okay,
next.
We have to start somewhere. Yeah. So a little dejected, I walked down the street and I found this beautiful restaurant with, exposed brick, a wonderful wine closet, and I walked in and I said, are you hiring? And they said, yes. And so I started that evening. And as time went on, I was a little bored in the beginning, and so I would read the Wine Spectator. And I found little tidbits that were interesting to me. So I remember distinctly reading about New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc and how the soil type in that area produced a very grassy, mineral-driven wine. I said, this is really interesting. Let me go to the table. And so I said, this is the New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and it has grassy notes to it. They have a little smell, and they say, that's correct. And so I say, wow, there must be something to it. And by then I was bit by the wine bug, and it just has, continued on and on for a few years
so
now.
That is so interesting, because I was speaking to you before about the chef I had on, and her start was kind of similar in the kitchen. Somebody said, come on in. But so I was curious, after you decided this is what you wanted to do, were there courses or classes you had to take? Do you have to work up the ladder?
Well, similar to chefing, they say that practice is your best guide. And so I did have the fortune to work in a high-end retail store in New York City, and New York City has about 250 plus distributors, so the amount of wine that's available is over 1 million different SKUs. And so
I can't even imagine.
I was there with my notebook, and I was torturing all the winemakers who came through, and I would ask them really specific technical questions. What is the soil composition? What are you doing in terms of maceration? And maceration basically means is when you get your grape and it has skins and seeds and pulp and everything and juice, and what you want to do is you want to have the skins touch the juice for a certain amount of time to extract flavor and color. And so there's a lot of different techniques where you can have the skin contact for about 30 days or months or hours. So that's a whole nother thing. So I learned a lot on the job, if you will. But knowing that the modern era really does like a certificate, I did take a couple of WSET courses, and so I have distinguished certification there. So.
So you do? Okay.
I technically know about wine. I practically and technically know about wine.
And you have that certificate to prove it?
I do, yeah.
Now, and is that a profession that is there an upward mobility to that, or does it really depend upon where you end up?
You can do a plethora of things. You can work in a vineyard, you can make the wine, you can do what I do currently, which is sell the wine. You could own a vineyard, you can own a restaurant, you could be a broker. Really the sky's the limit.
The sky, so you can really own that.
You can do anything.
So you became interested in wine, very much self-taught on a lot of that information, which is wonderful. following a passion.
Yeah,
that you found, yeah.
I know.
Great.
Yeah, absolutely.
With
It's
that.
very
So,
passion driven.
We're going to talk a bit about wine because
Sure.
I'm very curious. You mentioned a bit about with the grape skin and the flavor and how that adds to the flavor of wine.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to talk a bit more about that when we talk about wines and the flavor. Can you tell us more about the flavors in wine?
Yeah,
how that
absolutely.
happens?
So there's quite a few things to take into consideration. So wine is definitely not simple, but for example, in somewhere like Connecticut, maybe Connecticut's not the greatest example. Maybe I should use France. So Burgundy, France is a very famous wine region, and that grows basically two different grape varieties, Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And so where it is, it's in a temperate climate, so something that is similar to Connecticut. It does have all 4 seasons. That's something that you need in winemaking, because if it's too hot or too cold, the grapes won't do very well.
Interesting. So, because I'm thinking of a place like Greece, they have wine, but is that why it's so sweet?
There's a lot of factors there with Greece.
Okay.
So Greece, believe it or not, has a mountain range, and the mountain range have snow on them almost all year round. And so the currents from there, the air from there comes down and it cools off the vines, especially during the nighttime. So what you want to do is you want to have your grapes ripen during the day, but at night they need to cool down so that they preserve their acidity. And acidity is their tartness level, and that helps make the wine balanced and delicious. It also plays very well with food. It makes you salivate, which makes you also want to drink a little bit more wine.
Oh, you're kidding.
Yeah.
So you talk about the chemistry of it. That's fascinating.
Yeah. And then
there's actually something in it that makes you want to have more wine.
Right. And so also the soil that it's grown in. So for example, if you have very sandy soil, you'll have a very aromatic wine. And so you'll have all these perfumey flavors and rose petals and such. And if you have more of a clay-based soil, you'll have a lot more broad-shouldered wines, like your big Bordeaux's and Merlots and things like that.
That's
do well
fascinating.
in those regions.
With those regions, what would you say for Connecticut soil? We're rocky, but
Connecticut, so Connecticut, where you find the vineyards in Connecticut are on the hillsides, because they have, I didn't do the research, but I believe in, like, let's say the Jurassic period. So many eons ago, there were mountains here and volcanic activity. And so what happens there is that the magma comes from the center of the earth, and it is replete with so many different minerals in it. And so it makes the ground very not nutrient rich, but minerally rich.
Sure.
And so that gives complexity to the wine as well.
Wow.
The thing about Connecticut is that it doesn't have a very deep soil topography, because a lot of us live above the water. So it's a little bit of a shelf here. So you don't have a whole lot of grapes that can go very deep down into the ground, because they'll hit salt water.
So that's going to influence the flavor too.
Yeah.
And we have a flavor wheel to look at, I believe.
We do.
So would that help explain some of it?
Sure.
If we could see the flavor wheel.
Sure.
And then we'll talk about how some of those come about.
Yeah.
Oh, here it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so here
it
explains the basic fundamentals so that you can understand what you're tasting, because a lot of the time you have a glass of wine and people say, oh, it tastes like apricots and tangerine, and you're smelling it and you say, it smells like wine. And you're saying, what are you talking about, Tanya? So I really love this flavor wheel, because here you can say, oh, does it taste sour to you? And then if you say yes, then maybe it tastes like citrus peel. Maybe it tastes like persimmon.
I see.
And then if you have fruity, you say, does it taste like red fruits or black fruits or blue fruits? And that's how we describe things in wine. Exactly.
So I don't know if people can see, but the inner circle ones are fruity, sweet, nutty, and then the color sections themselves would describe things that would make up that sweet type flavor.
Yeah, so you can figure out how you would like to pair your wines with food. It's very helpful because you can either go opposite like you do with art. So with a color wheel, you can go opposite or you can go similar. So it depends on what kind of experience you would like.
Now, what's going to influence this? You said the soil.
So the soil, and then also we talked about where it's grown. So if it's further south, like for example in a region like Australia, it's a little bit warmer, so you're going to get a little bit more pronounced fruits. Places like Germany and Austria are a little bit colder, and so you'll have a little bit more green flavors, a little bit more muted, I'm not sure is the right word, but not as expressive, a little bit more nuanced, if you will.
And they have and when you talk about Germany, I'm thinking of the Rieslings and the ice wines, things like that, and that are sweeter too.
They are sweeter as well. Yeah.
And so we talk soil, where they're grown, as you said, the temperature is a big part of it as well.
Absolutely. There's a fun other factor that not a lot of people know about, and that's the yeast. And so alcohol needs yeast sugar eats the yeast and then becomes alcohol. And so sometimes I like to describe it like a butterfly. So when you have a grape, just say we'll call a grape the same as a caterpillar, and then when you're fermenting it, it kind of goes into its chrysalis. And so what happens with the grape varieties is that if you taste a Chardonnay grape, it's not going to taste anything like a Chardonnay that you get in a bottle, right? So it tastes like a beautiful grape that you would have from the store. But what happens is that all the flavor molecules kind of explode and reorient themselves, and they attach themselves to the yeast and then transform themselves like a butterfly would. But the other component to it that the winemaker can choose to have is the fermentation vessel. So for example, you can ferment in stainless steel, which would give you very clear and clean flavors, very much more fruit-oriented flavors. Then you can also choose to ferment in stainless steel. I'm sorry, I just said that. In oak, rather. And the oak will give you the vanilla, spicy characteristics. There we are. And then a lot of people are actually experimenting with concrete, and that's kind of harkening back to the Roman times.
Oh, really?
Because that's what they used to do in the Roman times. So with the Romans, what they used to do is they would put all of their grapes into an amphora, and I'm not sure if they...
Is that like a jug?
Into a large jug.
Right.
Yeah, almost like a vase, if you will. And then they would put olive oil soaked rags on top, and then they would dig a ditch and put it underneath the ditch, because the soil in the ground has a lot better of a temperature control than air does outside. And so it's kind of fun to see how we've gone back to the old times to influence our new times.
So do you think when we look at the different vessels, because, and I know I'm talking breweries, which is, I don't know if the process for beer is different than wine.
Similar.
Yeah. But with beer, you see, I guess, a lot more stainless steel. Do you think the stainless steel with the wine fermentation is as good? I hate to say that. Is as good? Is it different?
It's all good.
It's all good.
It's all good. The only thing I would say is that they typically don't age for as long. Okay. Because when you're aging wine, oxygen is your friend and your foe. So if you do ferment in stainless steel, you're not really getting any oxygen. But when you have oak or concrete, there's just a little bit of micro-oxygenation happening. And what that does is it makes the wine a little bit more fuller, a little bit more expressive. So.
I noticed too when you were talking earlier about the skin of the grapes, and I don't know if I've done a few different vineyards, but I'm never sure if I'm getting the right, because there's so much information at one time. But when you talk about, like, if I have a Chardonnay, it's not a white grape, right?
It is a white grape.
It is a white grape.
It is,
okay, so the Chardonnay is a white grape.
Yeah.
And so is it just that? Is it that a matter of fact that the white grapes they do the white wine and
red grapes do the red wines.
And what about champagne?
Champagne is actually done with red grapes.
That's right. Okay, maybe that's where I got it from.
So there are 99 almost % of wine, grapes rather, have clear skin, if you will. So if clear pulp, if you will. So if it doesn't have any contact with the skin, then it will stay clear. So that's where rosé comes in. So rosé is where you have a little bit of the skin touching the grape juice, and and for a matter of hours or a matter of days, usually it's a matter of hours, just a quick little kiss, and then you get a little bit of that flavor profile, and you get a little hint of color.
I see, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, good. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk more about food pairing as well with wines. Be right back.
You matter.
You matter.
You matter.
And your words matter too.
Your words matter.
What you say in the hallways at school or in the student section at a game matters.
Words can be hurtful.
Words can be offensive.
Words can leave scars.
Words can also inspire.
Support and uplift.
You and your words.
Are they both important?
As a matter of fact, yes.
Community TV, your neighborhood TV.
Publicly funded and a reliable partner for cable companies nationwide, it provides transparent coverage of local and state government, education, and public programming.
A digital town green that can be watched anywhere, anytime, and on any device.
Watch us on today's high-tech distribution methods.
Community TV in Connecticut.
Local,
unfiltered,
reliable, and yours.
Hi, welcome back to Sure Things. I'm here today with Tanya Porcelli. Welcome back, Tanya.
Thank you.
So when we left for break, we were talking a bit about different wines and the grapes, but I had mentioned a bit about champagne, and I wanted to kind of pick up from there and talk a little bit about the difference between sparkling wines or champagnes. I know that's a very specialized region, though, and other wines.
Sure. So definitely, they are definitely a little bit different. Champagne is, if you will, the benchmark for all sparkling wine. Basically, they had created champagne, and as people have been traveling a little bit more, they said, okay, this is delicious. I would like to make it in my own country. And so that's how we get cava from Spain. And then in Italy, we also make Prosecco. Prosecco is done in a little bit of a different fashion, though. So the way that you make champagne is you have the second fermentation in the bottle. So what you do is you put a little bit of very concentrated grape juice from the same vineyard, if you will, into the wine. And so what happens is it goes through another fermentation very quickly, and that's how you get the bubbles. And so that's why, exactly, and that's why that's when you put the cap on. And there's actually quite a long process of
because they turn
champagne.
the bottles.
That's called riddling.
Yeah,
yes.
right, that whole thing.
Right.
So, and am I right that if it's a champagne, it has to come from Champagne?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
There's one exception, and that is Corbel. Corbel was grandfathered in to say California Champagne before the Champagne was designated that you could only.
I know because I wonder how long ago that was. I thought that was like.
It was not as long ago as we think. A lot of these wine laws were created in the 1900s, and that can go all the way up to like 1980s, you know, and actually now things are still in flux. So even in 2010, there was a new law written on the books for Tuscan wine. There's a new level called Gran Selezione, but anyway, the wine world is constantly evolving.
Well, and I'm sure it's very competitive. When you mentioned all those types of wine, and there's so many, it must be so competitive as you go through it. We talked a bit about the sparkling, and which is, I think, light and fruity, right? And then if you go to the, I guess if you go all the way to the other extreme, I think of the port, because it's kind of thick or heavier, more intense. Can you? What is the difference? How does port get to be so different?
So there's basically two different kinds of port that we. Well, there's many different kinds of port, but the two main categories that we talk about are tawny and ruby. And your ruby is your younger ports, and your tawny is your older ports. So ports are technically only coming from Portugal, and that actually is one of the oldest demarcated areas. So back in the 1600s, they said we would like to have this style of wine indoctrinated, and so we have a recipe, if you will, of how to make this wine. Their wines are made very differently. So what they do is they will have a whole blend of up to 13 or more different grape varieties that they have in there, and they will stop the fermentation when the wine is only about 8% alcohol, and they will stop the fermentation by adding a little bit of grape brandy to it to neutralize. So
that stops it.
and that's why it stays sweet. And then they'll put it in a vat into some oak for about 4 years to get it to be ruby. And so what you end up tasting is a very black currant, cassis, deep, rich, jammy wine. And if you have it for a longer period of time, you'll end up with more of a tawny wine, and that will be more nutty, a little bit more like dried fruits, like dried apricots and figs and things like that.
Do people drink a great deal of port, or is
they
that?
don't?
No, they don't.
They
No,
don't, which is a shame.
It used to be more like of a dessert wine.
Yeah, it's a dessert wine, but I feel that because it has such a high concentration of sugar, maybe some people have finished the bottle to themselves because it's so delicious, and the only problem with that is the next morning you hate port.
I would imagine so. That's quite a bit of sugar, right, to take in.
Yeah.
We're now getting, and the day did brighten up quite a bit today, we're getting into the warmer season with spring and summer. What do you notice, what do you recommend as we get out of that chilly, cool weather people are gravitating to?
I love rosé, I have to say. There has been an explosion on the market. There are darker rosés that I choose to have with heartier meals, like if you're a barbecuer, if you putting something outside on the grill, it's great to have a darker rosé. If you want to go very traditional, from the region of Tavel in France. If you would like to go a little lighter with salads or some chicken or some seafood, you can go for a more Provence style, which is a little bit lighter in color, a little bit more easy to drink.
Right, I'm familiar with the Provence style. I wasn't familiar with the first one that you talked about. I didn't realize there was a deeper rosé. So when we talk food pairings too, because we mentioned we were going to do that, it sounds like for some of the summer, spring meals, a rosé would be good.
It would be.
Do people do, we have burgers and cookouts.
Yeah.
What would a red be, or would you do a red?
You can do a red, and you can also chill a red down. So if you want to go back to your stainless steel, if you know a wine is made in stainless steel, there's a good chance that it does chill very well, because it doesn't have those rough tannins that you would get from an oak-aged wine. So you have a lot smoother, a lot fruitier of a feeling. So
is there one, not brand-wise, but is there a type of red that you would?
Beaujolais, Gamay, Beaujolais, those are fantastic. Otherwise, it's a little bit of a case-by-case thing. There's a lot of wines being made in Italy right now, and a lot of wines being made in the Rhone Valley as well that you could use. But it's a little bit of a experiential thing. You have to figure out case-by-case basis.
And when they say fish, they usually do a white wine with fish.
They do usually, but Oregon, for example, is famous for its Pinot Noir and salmon. So salmon is a little bit of a heartier fish, and so you can use Pinot Noir with that. The swordfish is also a little bit heartier. You just don't want to go Cabernet Sauvignon, which is a really deep and heavy wine with a fish, because what ends up happening is you end up with a metallic taste in your mouth, which is just off-putting.
Oh, I would imagine so. Any difference between the screw top and the cork?
Okay. No, it has to be asked. It has to be asked. So there's a lot of schools of thought. For example, just plainly, screw caps don't allow for air to go through. Okay, so if you're going to age a wine for a very long time and want it to develop, a screw cap is not going to be your friend. The cork will be your friend, because there's a little bit of oxygen that gets in, and what ends up happening, it changes the wine as time goes on. Like for 10 years or so. I did have an experience that was very strange. I had a screw cap wine that was about 8 years old, and when I had the first glass, it was okay, but by the time I had the second glass, it had completely fallen apart. So screw caps are not for aging wine, really.
So just the summer nice light thing would be good with that.
Exactly, maybe 2 years or 3 years at the most.
And that's the most on that. Oh, that's great, good.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. We went over the summer wines. And so part of what you do is you go around and you do tastings, people have tastings, which is great. I love that idea. Where do you see yourself going? What for yourself? You have this great wine passion.
Yeah.
You mentioned you had a podcast too.
I do. I have a podcast with my friend.
Right, So you are branching out in different things. And I
feel that wine has become this unreachable unreachable thing that's been put on a pedestal, and I'm so sorry to be irreverent, but say it's just another beverage. There's a lot more into it, and I have so much respect in it, but I feel people are very intimidated by wine, and so they just avoid it, and that's the exact opposite. I feel like if you're intimidated by wine, you should drink as many or try as many different styles as you can, because there's a wine out there for everyone. That
reminds me, you go into the wine mart today, the big wine marts, and there's so many. So is it that you just have to go by one that you find, because it's just hard to know?
If you have a great steward at your wine shop, that's the first place that I would go to, because there's a good chance that that person has tried every single wine in their store. And the other thing is they might actually know what you like better than you. Yeah. So that's usually my first place to go.
So you find that they do have that knowledge that they can help you go through.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then my rule of thumb is smaller production, greater value. So if you see a wine that's been plastered everywhere, that's probably not as great of a value as a wine that you've never seen before.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's so many different ranges too. I was thinking of price ranges.
You can go from $4 to millions.
Do you collect at home?
I collect a little bit here and there. But my price point never goes above 100. Maybe one of these days it will, but to be honest, I find that there's a lot of great wines in that $50 range. I feel like it's a great benchmark.
Yeah, to go by that. And you mentioned some of the regions that we should look at, like Oregon, in the U.S. Oregon, Washington State, those type places.
Yeah. Right now, my focus is on New York State, because the Upper Finger Lakes is doing a lot of, mostly Riesling, but they're doing a lot of cool things with vineyards. Yeah, so it's really up and coming. It's a little bit of a younger crowd, so they're doing a little bit of a garage method.
Well, Tanya, I want to thank you. Can we say cheers, even though we have water? Cheers. Thank you for coming on Sure Things and teaching us, right?
Thank you.
Until next time, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, Mary Pilchininoff signing off for Sure Things. Please send any comments or questions to my email, surethingsct.gmail. Take care. Bye-bye.